I never thought a piece of bright blue canvas would turn my entire neighborhood into a war zone. But here we are, standing in my driveway with Barbara Reynolds shrieking at me about HOA regulations while my coffee gets cold in my hand. Let me back up a bit. My name is Sebastian Garrett, and I bought my house in Clearwater, Florida 3 years ago. The place was perfect waterfront property with a decent dock, enough space for my 23-foot fishing boat, and what I thought was a reasonable homeowners association. I work as a marine mechanic, so having easy access to the water and space for my boat was non-negotiable. The neighborhood, Pelican Bay Estates, seemed like paradise when I first moved in. Palm trees lined the streets, the houses were well maintained, and everyone seemed friendly enough during the initial meet and greets. That all changed about 6 months ago when Barbara Reynolds got elected as the new HOA president. She was a 52-year-old real estate agent with too much time on her hands and an apparent vendetta against anything she deemed aesthetically displeasing. Her campaign had been all about preserving property values and maintaining community standards, which should have been my first red flag. The morning everything went sideways started like any other Tuesday. I had just finished installing a new cover on my boat, a nice, sturdy blue canvas cover that would protect it from the brutal Florida sun and the afternoon thunderstorms that rolled through like clockwork. The old cover had finally given up after years of UV exposure, cracking and tearing until it was basically useless. I spent $200 on this new one, a quality marine-grade cover in a nice royal blue color that matched the boat's hull trim. I was admiring my handiwork, thinking about how much longer this cover would extend the life of my boat's upholstery and electronics, when I heard the clicking of heels on my driveway. I turned to see Barbara approaching, her perfectly styled blonde hair not moving an inch despite the morning breeze, wearing what looked like a business suit despite it being barely 8 in the morning. She carried a clipboard, which was never a good sign. "Sebastian," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "we need to talk about your boat cover." I took a sip of my coffee, already feeling my good mood evaporate. "Good morning to you too, Barbara. What about it?" She stopped about 5 feet away, her nose wrinkling slightly as if my boat personally offended her. "The color. It's not approved. According to Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the HOA Covenant, all boat covers, tarps, and protective equipment must be in earth tones or neutral colors. That blue is far too bright and garish." I stared at her for a long moment, trying to process what I was hearing. "You're joking." "I most certainly am not." She flipped through the papers on her clipboard with practiced efficiency. "The approved colors are beige, tan, brown, forest green, and gray. Royal blue is not on the list." "Barbara, I just spent $200 on this cover. The old one was literally falling apart. This is a boat cover. It's supposed to protect my investment." "Then you should have consulted the guidelines before making your purchase." She pulled out a form and held it toward me. "You have 14 days to replace it with an approved color, or you'll be fined $50 per day until you comply." My jaw actually dropped. $50 a day? Are you out of your mind? Her expression hardened, and the fake sweetness disappeared entirely. "I'm enforcing the rules that every homeowner agreed to when they purchased property in Pelican Bay Estates. You signed the covenant. Ignorance is not an excuse." "I'm not ignorant of the rules, Barbara. I'm questioning the sanity of fining someone $50 a day over a boat cover color. Nobody can even see it except you and maybe the Johnsons next door. And they've already told me they don't care." "The Johnsons don't make the rules. The HOA does. 14 days, Sebastian." She turned on her heel and walked away before I could respond further. I stood there in my driveway, fuming, watching her perfect posture and clicking heels retreat down the sidewalk. My neighbor, Mike Johnson, emerged from his garage and walked over, shaking his head. "I heard that whole thing," he said. "Man, she's really something else." "She's insane is what she is. A boat cover? Really?" Mike shrugged. "Ever since she became president, it's been one thing after another. She sent us a violation notice because Linda's garden gnomes were too whimsical and didn't match the neighborhood aesthetic. We had to remove them. This is getting out of control. Tell me about it. But what are you going to do? The fines are real, and she's got the board backing her up. Terry Chen and Patricia Morrison rubber stamp everything she proposes." I looked back at my boat, at the crisp new blue cover protecting thousands of dollars worth of equipment. The color looked great, professional even, There was nothing garish about it. I don't know yet, but I'm not just rolling over on this. The next few days, I did my research. I pulled out my copy of the HOA covenant, all 73 pages of legal jargon and regulations. Sure enough, buried in Section 12, Paragraph 4, there was indeed a clause about boat covers and approved colors. But there was something else I noticed. The covenant had last been updated in 2003, over 20 years ago. Several other sections referenced rules and regulations that were clearly outdated or contradictory to current Florida law. I decided to attend the next HOA board meeting, which was scheduled for that Thursday evening. The meetings were held in the community center, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that also served as a gym and event space. When I arrived at 7 o'clock, about 15 other homeowners were already there, most looking as frustrated as I felt. Barbara sat at the front table with Terry Chen, a retired engineer, and Patricia Morrison, who taught at the local elementary school. They looked like they were preparing for a corporate board meeting rather than a neighborhood discussion. Let's call this meeting to order, Barbara announced, banging a gavel that seemed completely unnecessary. First order of business, treasurer's report. Terry droned on about the HOA's finances, detailing expenditures for landscaping, pool maintenance, and other community costs. Everything seemed to be in order there, at least. Then Barbara moved on to new business. We have several violation notices that have been issued in the past week, she began. I want to commend the community for mostly maintaining our standards, but there are a few outstanding issues that need to be addressed. She started listing them off. The Hendersons had their trash cans visible from the street on a non-collection day. The Patels had planted flowers in their front yard without submitting a landscaping modification request. Someone on Sandpiper Lane had a car parked in their driveway for more than 48 hours without moving it. Then she got to me. Sebastian Garrett on Marina Drive has installed a non-compliant boat cover. He's been given 14 days to rectify the situation. I raised my hand. I'd like to speak about that. Barbara's lips pressed into a thin line. Homeowners may speak during the open comment period at the end of the meeting. This directly pertains to current business. I think it's relevant now. She sighed dramatically. Very well, keep it brief. I stood up, holding my own copy of the covenant. I understand there's a rule about boat cover colors. What I don't understand is the reasoning behind it or why the fine is so excessive. $50 per day amounts to $1,500 a month, which is more than most people's mortgage payments. That seems punitive rather than corrective. The fine structure is designed to encourage rapid compliance, Barbara responded. If the fines were trivial, no one would bother following the rules. But the rule itself seems arbitrary. My boat is on my property, barely visible from the street. The cover is protecting valuable equipment from sun damage. What actual harm does the color blue cause to the community? Patricia spoke up, her voice gentler than Barbara's. The covenant exists to maintain a cohesive aesthetic throughout the neighborhood. When everyone follows the guidelines, it preserves property values for all of us. Does it, though? I pulled out my phone, where I had done some research. I looked at property values in Pelican Bay Estates compared to similar waterfront communities in Clearwater. Our values have remained essentially flat over the past 5 years, while neighborhoods with more relaxed HOAs have actually appreciated more. The color of my boat cover isn't affecting anyone's property value. That's speculative, Barbara interjected. You can't prove causation. And you can't prove that my blue boat cover is causing any harm whatsoever. I'm asking the board to reconsider this violation, or at least reduce the fine to something reasonable while I save up for a different cover. Terry finally spoke, his voice measured and technical. The covenant is the covenant. We don't have the authority to simply ignore provisions we find inconvenient. If you want to change the rules, you need to propose an amendment and get it voted on by the community. How do I do that? You need signatures from at least 30% of homeowners to bring an amendment to a vote. Then, it requires a 2/3 majority to pass. Barbara added, and I should mention that any proposed amendments need to be reviewed by the board before they can be brought to a general vote. We have to ensure they're legally sound and in the community's best interest. In other words, she'd block anything she didn't like. This was going nowhere. After the meeting, several homeowners approached me in the parking lot. A woman named Jennifer Martinez told me she'd received a violation for having a wreath on her door that was the wrong color. Another guy, David Park, had been fined for parking his work truck in his own driveway because it had his company logo on the side. "She's turning this place into a prison," David said. "I'm thinking about selling and getting out." "That's what she wants," Jennifer added. "She's mentioned at meetings that she thinks the neighborhood should be more upscale. I think she's trying to push out the working-class families." That thought stuck with me as I drove home. Barbara lived in one of the largest houses in the development, right on the waterfront with an expansive view of the bay. Her house was probably worth close to $1 million, while mine was in the more modest section, valued around $350,000. Was this really about aesthetics, or was it about something else? The 14-day deadline loomed over me. I spent hours online looking at alternative boat covers in the approved colors, but they were all either more expensive, lower quality, or would take weeks to ship. I called Barbara's office, hoping to negotiate an extension or a payment plan for the fines while I resolved the issue. Her assistant, a mousy woman who sounded terrified of her boss, told me that Barbara had a strict policy about extensions. "No special treatment," the assistant whispered. "She says it sets a bad precedent." I tried a different approach. I contacted an attorney who specialized in HOA disputes, a woman named Rachel Foster who had a practice in Tampa. Her consultation fee was $200, but I figured it was worth it. Rachel listened to my story, reviewed the covenant documents I emailed her, and then delivered her assessment over the phone. "You're in a tough spot," she said. "The covenant is legally binding, and while the fine structure is aggressive, it's not technically illegal unless it rises to the level of being unconscionable. Some judges might find $50 a day excessive, but others would uphold it. So I'm stuck? Not necessarily. There are a few angles we could pursue. First, the covenant hasn't been updated in over 20 years. There are several provisions that may conflict with current Florida statute. Second, the enforcement appears to be selective. If the HOA isn't consistently enforcing all provisions of the covenant against all homeowners equally, that's a problem. Third, the board's authority to levy these fines needs to be examined. Did they follow proper procedure when setting the fine schedule? How would I know? That's what discovery is for. If we filed a lawsuit, we could subpoena HOA records, meeting minutes, financial documents. But I have to be honest with you. Sebastian litigation is expensive and time-consuming. Even if you win, you'd probably spend more in legal fees than just buying a new cover and moving on. So, they just get away with it. Unfortunately, that's how a lot of HOA disputes go. The association has the power and the resources, and individual homeowners often can't afford to fight back. My advice? Document everything, comply minimally to avoid the fines, and start organizing your neighbors. If you can get enough people together, you can vote out the board or change the covenant. I thanked her for her time and hung up, feeling more frustrated than ever. The system was rigged in favor of petty tyrants like Barbara, and there wasn't much I could do about it. Then, sitting in my living room that evening, staring out at my boat with its offending blue cover, an idea started to form. Barbara's house had the best view in the neighborhood, a clear sightline across the bay, with my boat dock and several others visible in the foreground. She'd mentioned at various HOA meetings how much she valued her pristine water view, and how important it was to keep the neighborhood looking immaculate. The covenant said the cover had to be an approved color. It didn't say I had to have a cover at all. I spent that night researching what would happen to a boat left uncovered in the Florida sun. The results weren't pretty. UV radiation would bleach and crack the upholstery within months. The fiberglass gel coat would oxidize and fade, turning chalky and dull. Any vinyl would become brittle. The electronics would be exposed to moisture and heat. Basically, my nice boat would turn into an eyesore, but it would be a compliant eyesore. The next morning, I called Mike Johnson over to help me remove the cover. "Are you sure about this?" he asked as we started unsnapping the canvas. "Completely sure. If Barbara wants to play stupid games, she can win stupid prizes." We folded up the blue cover and stored it in my garage. The boat sat there in the morning sun, looking pristine and well-maintained. For now, I took photos of everything, documenting the condition of the boat, the date, and the fact that I was in compliance with HOA rules by not having any cover at all. Then, I emailed Barbara. Dear Barbara, per your notice regarding the non-compliant boat cover, I have removed the cover entirely. As there is no regulation requiring boats to be covered, only regulating the color of covers if present, I believe I am now in full compliance. Please confirm that no further violation exists. Regards, Sebastian Garrett. Her response came within an hour. Your boat is now in compliance regarding the cover issue. The violation has been cleared from your record. Perfect. Mike stood in my driveway, staring at the boat. So you're just going to let it get destroyed? Yep. That's a $20,000 boat, man. I'm aware, but it's my boat on my property and I'm following all the HOA rules. If Barbara doesn't like looking at it, she can blame herself. Over the next few weeks, I watched the Florida sun begin its work. The first thing to go was the vinyl on the seats. The bright white started to yellow, then crack. The royal blue accents on the upholstery began to fade to a washed-out gray. The gel coat on the hull, which I had meticulously maintained with regular waxing, started to oxidize, developing a chalky white haze. It looked terrible, and it broke my heart a little bit every day. But I kept documenting everything with photos. More importantly, I started noticing Barbara's reaction. She'd drive past my house multiple times a day, slowing down to stare at the boat. A few times I caught her standing at the end of her driveway, hands on her hips, just glaring at it. The Johnsons reported that she'd been complaining about it during her morning power walks. Then came the next HOA meeting. I made sure to attend, curious to see if she'd say anything. She did. We need to discuss the issue of boat maintenance standards, Barbara announced during new business. It has come to my attention that some vessels being stored in the neighborhood are not being properly maintained, creating an unsightly appearance. I raised my hand. Are you talking about my boat, Barbara? I'm speaking generally about community standards. No, I think you're speaking specifically about my boat, the one that's fully compliant with all HOA regulations after I removed the blue cover you objected to. Her face flushed slightly. Your boat looks like it hasn't been maintained in years. The upholstery is cracked, the hull is oxidized, and it's an eyesore from anyone who has a water view. My boat was in perfect condition until you forced me to remove the cover that was protecting it. I'm following your rules exactly. There's no regulation requiring me to cover my boat, only regulating the color if I choose to use a cover. I chose not to use one. This is ridiculous. You're deliberately letting your property deteriorate. I'm exercising my rights as a homeowner to manage my property as I see fit within the confines of the HOA covenant. If you'd like to propose an amendment requiring all boats to be covered, you're welcome to do so. Terry Chen shifted uncomfortably. Sebastian has a point. We can't require him to cover his boat if there's no rule mandating it. Then we need to create one, Barbara snapped. Actually, I said, pulling out my phone, I did some more research. Florida Statute 720.3035 specifically limits HOA authority over certain types of property. Marine vessels are included in those protections. You can regulate where I park my boat and reasonable aesthetic concerns, but you can't require me to spend money maintaining it to your personal standards. I'd spent another $200 consulting with Rachel Foster to make sure I had my facts straight. It was worth every penny to see Barbara's expression. Patricia spoke up. Maybe we should table this discussion until we can review the relevant statutes and consult with our attorney. Fine, Barbara bit out, but this isn't over. After the meeting, even more homeowners approached me. Word had spread about what I was doing, and opinions were mixed. Some people thought I was being petty and hurting the neighborhood. Others were cheering me on, seeing it as a stand against Barbara's overreach. One couple, the Hendersons, invited me over for dinner. They'd been in Pelican Bay Estate since it was first developed back in 2001. Barbara's the worst HOA president we've ever had, Mrs. Henderson told me over chicken parmesan. We've had our share of sticklers and busybodies, but she's on another level. She seems to take personal offense at anything that doesn't meet her standards, Mr. Henderson added. The thing is, she's not even enforcing the rules equally. Have you noticed that her friends never get violation notices? The Chens have had the same broken fence slat for 6 months, but Terry's on the board, so nobody says anything. Patricia's son parks his motorcycle on the street overnight at least twice a week, which is explicitly prohibited, but no violations there either. Selective enforcement, I said. My attorney mentioned that's actionable. You should document it, Mrs. Henderson suggested. Take photos, keep records. If you're going to fight this, you need evidence. I took their advice to heart. Over the next month, I started keeping a detailed log. Every time I noticed a potential HOA violation that wasn't being enforced, I documented it with photos, dates, and times. The Patel's unapproved flowers? Still there, no follow-up. David Park's work truck? He'd been fined, but the Robertsons 2 streets over had an equally large truck with company logos, no violation. Someone had a trampoline in their backyard visible from the street, which violated the covenant section on recreational equipment. No notice. Meanwhile, my boat continued to deteriorate. The dashboard started to crack. The metal fixtures began to corrode from exposure to salt air. The seats were now beyond repair, completely cracked and faded. What had been a beautiful vessel was turning into a derelict. I hated it, but I also felt a grim satisfaction knowing that Barbara had to look at it every single day from her pristine waterfront mansion. Then things escalated. I came home from work one afternoon to find a professionally printed notice taped to my door. Courtesy inspection. Notice, it read. The HOA board has authorized a property inspection to ensure compliance with maintenance standards. A representative will conduct a walkthrough of your property on June 15th at 10 a.m. Your presence is requested but not required. I called Rachel Foster immediately. Can they do this? I asked. It depends on what the covenant says about inspections. Let me look. I heard papers rustling. Okay. Section 21 gives the board the right to inspect properties with 72 hours notice, but only to verify specific violations or assess common area maintenance needs. They can't just do random inspections without cause. The notice doesn't specify what they're inspecting for. Then it's probably not enforceable, but I'd recommend being there anyway. Don't let them inside your house. They have no right to enter the dwelling itself, but the exterior is technically fair game. June 15th arrived, and so did Barbara, along with Terry Chen and a guy I didn't recognize carrying a clipboard and camera. I met them in my driveway. Sebastian, Barbara greeted me coolly. This is Donald Reed from Coastal Property Assessments. We've hired him to conduct an objective evaluation of property conditions. Donald was a thin man in his 50s wearing a polo shirt and khaki. He looked deeply uncomfortable with the situation. I'm here to document the condition of your boat and any other potential maintenance issues, he explained. This is purely factual, nothing personal. Go ahead, I said. Document away. Donald spent about 20 minutes walking around my property, taking photos and making notes. He looked at the boat from every angle, examined my house's exterior, checked the condition of my driveway, and inspected the landscaping. Barbara followed him around, pointing things out and making comments. The boat is clearly neglected, she said. Look at that oxidation, and the seats are completely ruined. When was the cover removed? Donald asked me. About 2 months ago. It was in perfect condition before that. He made a note. And why was it removed? The HOA demanded I replace the cover because it was the wrong color. Rather than spend money on a new cover just to satisfy an arbitrary aesthetic preference, I removed it entirely, which is compliant with HOA regulations. Donald's eyebrows rose slightly, but he didn't comment. He continued his inspection, finding very little else to note. My house was well maintained, my lawn was mowed, and everything else was in good shape. When he finished, Barbara thanked him and said they'd be in touch. Donald handed me his card as he left. For what it's worth, he said quietly, the boat looks like recent weather damage, not long-term neglect. I'll note that in my report. 2 weeks later, I received a certified letter from the HOA. They were fining me $500 for failure to maintain property standards and giving me 30 days to restore my boat to acceptable condition or face additional fines of $100 per day. This was war. I forwarded everything to Rachel Foster and asked her to draft a response. She sent a strongly worded letter to the HOA outlining several legal issues with their actions. Selective enforcement, excessive fines, potential violation of Florida statute regarding marine vessel regulations, and improper inspection procedures. She also demanded copies of all HOA meeting minutes for the past year, financial records showing fine collection and enforcement patterns, and documentation of Barbara's authority to hire the inspector. The HOA's attorney responded, a law firm out of Tampa called Morrison & Associates. Their letter was equally aggressive, defending the HOA's actions and threatening further legal action if I didn't comply. We were heading toward litigation, which was exactly what Rachel had warned me to avoid. But I was past the point of backing down. This wasn't about the boat anymore. It was about whether Barbara and the HOA board could bully homeowners into submission with arbitrary rules and excessive fines. I started organizing. I created a private Facebook group called Pelican Bay Estates Homeowners United and invited everyone I knew who had complained about Barbara's enforcement tactics. Within a week, we had 43 members, which was more than a third of the neighborhood. People shared their stories of violations, fines, and selective enforcement. Jennifer Martinez posted photos of board members' properties showing uncorrected violations. David Park compiled a spreadsheet of every fine issued in the past year, showing a clear pattern of targeting specific homeowners while ignoring others. The evidence was damning. Barbara had created a culture of fear and favoritism, using the HOA as her personal fiefdom to enforce her vision of what the neighborhood should be. We decided to take action at the next general membership meeting, which was scheduled for July 20th. According to the covenant, homeowners could call for a vote of no confidence in the board with a petition signed by 30% of residents. We had more than enough signatures. The week before the meeting, Barbara must have realized what was coming. She sent out an email to all homeowners defending her record as HOA president, listing improvements she'd made to common areas, highlighting successful neighborhood events, and painting herself as a victim of a few disgruntled residents who refused to follow basic rules. The response from our group was swift. We sent out our own email, carefully worded to avoid any defamation claims, presenting facts and figures about enforcement patterns, fine totals, and specific examples of selective rule application. We included photos of board members' properties with violations that had been ignored. The night of the meeting, the community center was packed. Every seat was filled and people lined the walls. The energy in the room was tense. Barbara called the meeting to order, trying to maintain her usual authoritative demeanor, but I could see the strain in her face. She knew this wasn't going to go well. Before we begin regular business, I stood up, holding the petition. I'd like to invoke Section 8, Paragraph 2 of the Covenant. We have a petition signed by 47 homeowners calling for a vote of no confidence in the current board and the election of new officers. Barbara's face went pale. You need to submit that through proper channels. It has to be reviewed. I've reviewed the covenant thoroughly, I interrupted. There are no additional channels. The petition is valid if it has signatures from at least 30% of homeowners. We have signatures from 42%. According to the bylaws, we must hold a vote tonight. Patricia leaned over to whisper something to Barbara. Terry was staring at the table, not making eye contact with anyone. This is highly irregular, Barbara protested. No, said a voice from the back. It was Mr. Henderson. What's irregular is a board that selectively enforces rules, levies excessive fines, and harasses homeowners for trivial issues while ignoring violations by their friends. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. I've lived here for 22 years, Mr. Henderson continued, standing up. We've had good boards and bad boards, but I've never seen anything like this. You've turned our neighborhood into a police state, Barbara. Enough is enough. The vote was held. By a count of 63-12 with 3 abstentions, the board was removed from office. New elections were scheduled for the following week. Barbara stood up, her face red with humiliation and anger. This is a mistake. You people don't understand what it takes to maintain standards. Without proper enforcement, this neighborhood will fall apart. Or maybe, I said, it'll become a place where people actually want to live again, instead of walking on eggshells, wondering if their garden gnome is the wrong shade of ceramic. She gathered her papers and stormed out, Terry and Patricia trailing behind her, looking relieved to be done with the whole situation. The following week, new board members were elected. Mike Johnson became president. Jennifer Martinez took over as treasurer. A retired paralegal named Susan Wright became secretary. The new board's first order of business was to conduct a comprehensive review of the covenant and create a more reasonable enforcement policy. They also refunded all the excessive fines that had been collected over the past year, including the $500 I'd been charged for my boat's condition. But here's where things got interesting, and frankly, a lot more serious. About a month after the new board took over, Susan Wright was going through the HOA's financial records in detail. She'd noticed some discrepancies in the books and wanted to make sure everything was in order before the next fiscal year. She called an emergency board meeting and asked me to attend since I'd been at the center of the whole conflict. "We have a problem," Susan said, spreading out bank statements and ledgers on the table. "A big problem. Over the past 18 months, almost $30,000 was missing from the HOA reserve fund. The money had been withdrawn in small increments, 500 here, 1,000 there, always with vague descriptions like emergency repairs or consulting fees. But when Susan cross-referenced these withdrawals with actual work orders and invoices, most of them didn't exist. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Mike asked. "I'm saying we need to call the police. This looks like embezzlement." My stomach dropped. As much as I disliked Barbara's authoritarian approach to the HOA, I hadn't imagined she'd actually be stealing money. Susan had done her homework. She'd contacted vendors who supposedly received payments and confirmed they'd never done work for the HOA. She'd tracked down the consulting fees to a company that turned out to be an LLC registered to Barbara's husband. The company had no employees, no office, and provided no identifiable services. The new board voted unanimously to contact the Clearwater Police Department. Detective Maria Santos was assigned to the case. She was a veteran investigator with the Financial Crimes Unit, and she took the matter seriously. Over the next several weeks, she subpoenaed bank records, interviewed board members past and present, and built a case. I was interviewed twice. Detective Santos wanted to understand the timeline of events when Barbara became president, when the aggressive enforcement started, and whether there was any connection between the two. "In my experience," Detective Santos told me during our second interview, "financial crimes like this often escalate alongside other controlling behaviors. People who embezzle from HOAs usually start small and get bolder as they consolidate power. Her aggressive rule enforcement might have been a way to distract from what she was doing with the finances or to push out people who might ask questions." That made a disturbing amount of sense. The investigation uncovered even more. The inspection Barbara had ordered, which cost the HOA $2,000 according to the books, had actually cost only $500. Donald Reed confirmed that he'd billed Barbara directly for $500 and had no knowledge of any additional fees. Barbara had pocketed the $1,500 difference. The landscaping contract had been inflated by 40%, with the excess going to another LLC owned by Barbara's husband. The pool maintenance company had been overbilling, and records suggested Barbara was receiving kickbacks. In total, Detective Santos estimated that Barbara had stolen nearly $45,000 from the HOA over 18 months. In September, Barbara Reynolds was arrested on charges of grand theft and organized fraud. The arrest made the local news. A suburban HOA president stealing from her neighbors wasn't the most common crime, but it wasn't unheard of either. I watched the news coverage with mixed feelings. Yeah, Barbara had made my life miserable over a boat cover. Yes, she'd abused her authority and created a toxic environment in the neighborhood, but seeing her in handcuffs being led to a police car was still jarring. Her attorney tried to arrange a plea deal, but the state attorney's office was pushing for prison time. HOA embezzlement had become a focus for Florida prosecutors after several high-profile cases, and they wanted to send a message. The case went to trial in December. I was called as a witness to describe the timeline of Barbara's enforcement actions and how they'd impacted the community. The prosecution argued that her aggressive rule enforcement was part of a pattern of behavior designed to consolidate control and prevent oversight of her financial crimes. The jury deliberated for 2 days before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. In January, Barbara Reynolds was sentenced to 4 years in state prison and ordered to pay full restitution of $45,000 plus court costs and penalties. Her husband, who had been complicit in setting up the shell companies, received 2 years probation and community service. As for my boat, well, that's the bittersweet part of this story. The damage from those months sitting uncovered in the Florida sun was extensive. I ended up spending nearly $4,000 replacing the upholstery, refinishing the gel coat, and repairing the corroded fixtures. Insurance covered some of it since I could document that the damage occurred during a specific time frame related to the HOA dispute, but I still ate a significant cost. However, the new board, in recognition of what I'd gone through and the role I'd played in uncovering the embezzlement, voted to compensate me for the boat repairs from the funds recovered from Barbara. It wasn't about the money at that point. I would have paid it anyway, but it was a nice gesture that showed how much the neighborhood culture had changed. I bought a new boat cover. This time, I got it in tan, one of the approved colors. But honestly, I could have gotten hot pink and nobody would have cared. The new board had revised the covenant enforcement policies to focus on genuine community concerns rather than aesthetic nitpicking. The whole experience taught me several things. First, homeowners associations can be valuable when run by reasonable people focused on actual community welfare. Second, unchecked authority combined with petty grievances creates toxic situations. Third, standing up to bullies, even when it costs you something in the short term, is worth it. The neighborhood genuinely changed after everything that happened. People seemed friendlier, more willing to help each other out. The constant anxiety about violation notices disappeared. We started having actual community events again, block parties, holiday gatherings, boat parades on the bay instead of just enforcement meetings. Mike Johnson turned out to be a great HOA president. His approach was simple: handle the necessary stuff like maintaining common areas and dealing with actual problems, but otherwise let people live their lives. Shockingly effective. I ran into Donald Reed, the inspector Barbara had hired, at a marine supply store a few months after the trial. He remembered me and apologized for his role in the whole situation. "I do legitimate property assessments," he explained. "I had no idea she was using my report as ammunition for harassment. When I found out what was really going on, I gave a statement to the police for free." I told him no hard feelings. He was just doing his job. The Johnsons became good friends. Mike and I go fishing together regularly, and his wife Linda is friends with my girlfriend Beth Rogers, who I'd started dating around the time all this craziness was happening. Beth had moved into the neighborhood right before the board shakeup, and she got to witness the transformation firsthand. She jokes that she almost backed out of buying her house when she heard about the HOA drama, but decided to stay and see how it played out. Jennifer Martinez started a neighborhood watch program that actually focuses on safety rather than covenant enforcement. David Park's work truck sits proudly in his driveway, company logo and all. The Patels expanded their garden and it's beautiful. Even the people who had initially supported Barbara came around eventually. Once the full extent of the embezzlement came out and they realized how they'd been manipulated, most of them felt betrayed. A few made a point to apologize to me personally for not speaking up sooner. Terry Chen resigned from the neighborhood entirely. He and his family moved to a condo in downtown Tampa. Patricia Morrison stayed but kept a very low profile. I saw her at the grocery store once, and she looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. I just nodded and kept walking. No point in grinding salt into those wounds. The strangest aftermath was that my property value actually increased. When potential buyers looked at homes in Pelican Bay Estates, the real estate agents started touting our reformed, reasonable HOA as a selling point. Apparently, the story of our neighborhood overthrowing a corrupt board and creating a better community became a positive talking point. Who knew? I still have that blue boat cover stored in my garage. Sometimes I look at it and remember that whole insane period, how something so trivial sparked a chain of events that exposed serious corruption and changed an entire community. Beth thinks I should frame it or something, turn it into art for my garage. She has a weird sense of humor like that. The boat itself is back to pristine condition, maybe even better than before since I upgraded a few things during the repairs. I take it out every weekend, fishing the waters off Clearwater Beach, enjoying the Florida sunshine and the freedom of being on the water. And every time I pull that tan cover over the boat when I'm done, making sure everything is protected and secure, I think about the absurdity of the whole situation. How a middle-aged real estate agent with control issues turned a boat cover color into a neighborhood war. How standing my ground over something that seemed petty actually mattered in the long run. How sometimes the right kind of stubbornness, applied to the right situation, can expose bigger problems. There's a lesson in there somewhere about choosing your battles, about standing up for principle even when it costs you, about how small acts of resistance can cascade into larger change. But mostly, when I think about the whole saga, I just shake my head and laugh. Barbara Reynolds thought she could find me into submission over a blue boat cover. Instead, she's serving 4 years in state prison, and I'm living peacefully in a neighborhood that actually feels like a community now. Sometimes the universe has a sense of justice after all. The legal aftermath continued for a while. Barbara's attorney filed appeals, arguing that the evidence was circumstantial or that the prosecution had overcharged. None of it went anywhere. The paper trail was too clear, the testimony too consistent. She'd stolen from her neighbors, and she got caught. End of story. Her husband tried to sell their waterfront mansion to cover the restitution payments, but the market had softened, and the stigma of the case hurt the property value. It eventually sold for about 20% less than the original asking price. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Barbara had spent so much energy trying to preserve property values through aggressive enforcement, and in the end, her own crimes tanked the value of her house. The HOA received full restitution by the time the house sold. The money went into a reserve fund with strict oversight procedures established by the new board. Susan Wright implemented a system requiring dual authorization for any expenditure over $500, and quarterly financial reports were distributed to all homeowners. Transparency became the watchword. I got asked to join the board at one point, but I declined. I'd played my role in fixing the problem. Now I wanted to just live my life without dealing with neighborhood politics. Mike understood and didn't push. What I did do was help draft the new enforcement guidelines. We created a system with graduated warnings, reasonable timelines for compliance, and fines that were actually proportional to the violations. More importantly, we built in protections against selective enforcement. Every violation had to be documented and applied consistently, or it couldn't be enforced at all. The covenant itself got a major overhaul. We organized a community-wide vote and amended about 30 different sections, removing outdated rules, clarifying vague language, and generally making the document more reasonable. The boat cover color requirement changed to simply state that covers must be commercially manufactured marine covers in good condition. No color restrictions. I sometimes wonder what Barbara thinks about now, sitting in her prison cell. Does she regret the embezzlement? Does she regret the way she treated people? Or does she still believe she was right, that everyone else was wrong, that she was the victim of ungrateful neighbors who didn't appreciate her efforts? I'll probably never know, and honestly, I don't need to. She's facing the consequences of her choices, and our neighborhood has moved on. Beth and I got engaged last month. We're planning a small wedding, probably on the beach, definitely not requiring any HOA approvals. Mike and Jennifer are both in the wedding party. We're inviting most of the neighborhood to the reception. Life is good. My boat has a tan cover now, perfectly compliant and perfectly boring. But underneath that cover is a vessel that reminds me every time I use it of the importance of standing up for yourself, of not letting bullies win through intimidation, and of the unexpected ways that doing the right thing can work out in the end. I paid a price for my resistance, thousands of dollars in boat repairs, legal consultation fees, time and stress and conflict. But I gained something more valuable: self-respect, genuine community connections, and the satisfaction of knowing that when it mattered, I didn't back down. The whole experience also taught me about the nature of authority and how easily it can be abused when there's no accountability. HOAs, in theory, exist to serve homeowners and maintain community standards. In practice, they can become petty fiefdoms for people who crave power and control over others. The only defense against that is an engaged, informed community willing to speak up and take action when things go wrong. We got lucky in a way. Barbara's financial crimes gave us the clear-cut justification we needed to remove her. But even without that, the community had organized and was ready to make changes. The embezzlement just accelerated the timeline and made the case more dramatic. I've told this story to friends outside the neighborhood, and reactions vary. Some people think I was petty for letting my boat get damaged just to make a point. Others think I was justified and even heroic for standing up to an abusive HOA president. The truth is probably somewhere in between. I'm not a hero. I was just a guy who got tired of being pushed around and found a creative way to push back. The best part of the whole thing, honestly, is that it's over. The drama has passed, the villain got her comeuppance, and life has returned to normal. Better than normal, actually, because the neighborhood is genuinely a nicer place to live now. I still see Barbara's old house when I drive past it. The new owners are a young family with 2 kids. They've painted it a cheerful yellow color that Barbara would have hated and installed a swing set in the backyard. The kids ride their bikes up and down the street, laughing and playing without worrying about HOA violation notices. That's what a neighborhood should be, a place where people live their lives, raise their families, and enjoy their homes without constant fear of arbitrary enforcement actions. It took a battle to get there, but we made it. And my boat? It's ready for the water whenever I am, protected by its boring tan cover that nobody has ever complained about, which is exactly how it should be. The moral of this story, if there is one, is simple. Sometimes the right response to unreasonable authority is creative resistance. You don't always have to fight fire with fire. Sometimes you just need to follow the rules in a way that exposes their absurdity. Barbara wanted to control the color of my boat cover. I gave her what she wanted: compliance with the letter of the law, while making her realize that the rule itself was counterproductive. She got to stare at my bleaching, deteriorating boat from her waterfront mansion every single day, knowing it was her own stubbornness that created the eyesore she claimed to be preventing. And in trying to punish me further for that, she drew attention to herself, which led to scrutiny of her finances, which exposed her crimes, which ended her freedom. Actions have consequences. Barbara learned that the hard way. As for me, I learned that standing up for yourself matters, that community is worth fighting for, and that sometimes a blue boat cover can change everything. It's been almost 2 years now since this all started. The neighborhood is thriving, my boat is in great shape, and life is peaceful. Beth and I are looking at houses with even better water access, maybe in a neighborhood without an HOA at all. We've learned our lesson about that, but if we do end up in another HOA community, at least now I know what to watch out for. I know the warning signs of authoritarian overreach, I know how to organize neighbors, and I know that individual homeowners have more power than they think when they work together. Most importantly, I know that no HOA president, no matter how aggressive or self-righteous, can withstand the scrutiny of an informed, motivated community. Barbara Reynolds found that out the hard way, and somewhere in a Florida state prison, she has 4 years to think about what a boat cover color really means in the grand scheme of things. Probably not much, but the principle behind standing up to petty tyrants, that means everything.